There it hangs, suspended in gloom, glowing dimly in darkness. A beacon there to inform us that there is always a way out. But don't go just yet. We have such wonderful things to show you. This is the Exit Light Podcast. Welcome back. I should apologize for missing the usual bi-weekly drop. It seems I am running low on content, and I suppose this means Season 2 is coming to a close. But what's this? There's something here. Oh, yes. What better way to end the season than with a finale? It will be a multi-part reading of Soulbound, my first novel. What's it about, you ask? Oh, lots of things, involving a vampire, a serial killer, and an assistant medical examiner. The story I have for you tonight is something I submitted to Horrific Publishing and can be found in Horrific Tales Volume 2, Cryptids. The link will be provided in case you'd like a copy for yourself. So without further delay, I present to you Eyja, Beinannar, the Island of the Bones. The storm descended like an ungodly hammer on us. My boat was not made for this kind of chop, and it was only a matter of time until the hammer would blast it into slag. Sure enough, on the descent from a 40-foot swell, I overcorrected and the rudder was practically ripped from the hull from extreme turbulence, and the next wave was already rising to greet us. Jackson looked at me then, his eyes as wide as saucers, knowing what it meant. We were going into the soup, nothing to be done about it. All we could do in those moments was hold on to something and pray. Something intervened in the way a passing train can stop a breakaway horse by sheer mass. Not sure how fast we could have been going when the collision happened, but it must have been really fast because the impact launched Jackson clear through the glass, out of the bridge, and into darkness. He didn't even scream. Maybe I did, though, until at least something hard and heavy broke loose and knocked me out cold. I awoke half submerged in water amidst the wreckage of the SS Lenore, and upon seeing Jackson there on land, I thought, what a strange position to be napping in. That is, until I recalled the event that brought us here. The look on his face as he rocketed out of the boat, seeing his scalp peel away from the razor edges of shattered glass, as if time had slowed just enough to burn those images into my memory. I've been sailing these waters for a good long while now, and this island was not in any of my internal maps, which made me wonder how far we could have been blown off course. Before I could tend to my friend, I had to see what supplies washed ashore with me, and what sort of trouble I was really in. A short walk down shore revealed the red and white bundle that filled me with relief, knowing there was at least a few days' worth of life packed away. The irony never seems to lose its barb when it comes to water out at sea. Surrounded by countless gallons, and none of it drinkable, it might as well be a desert, maybe even worse. There is no greater sensation in the world than to drink fresh cold water on the verge of dehydration. The trick is to drink slowly, allowing it to seep into your husking cells. Sometimes a person will vomit it right out if they take it in too fast, so I went slow, savoring each renewing sip. The headache diminished almost immediately, save for the sore lump on my forehead where I was concussed. Thinking a little clearer, I began to take note in greater detail of my surroundings, particularly the tide pool that I had retrieved the emergency pack from. Everything that skittered, swam, or clung to the rock was a sickly pale hue, as if any color it might have had was bleached out of it, the kind of thing you'd see on the deep ocean floor. Like everything else on this island, I thought, as if it was all made of bone left in the sun for a decade, then drowned in the depths. It was alien to me. Fashioned from a gaffing hook and fiberglass hull, the shovel bit into the mealy pale soil with little effort to complete the grim task of burying my longtime business partner and friend. Why I decided that it was something I had to do did not occur to me then. Maybe an optimist would have just covered them, and maybe there was a part of me that knew that help would not be coming anytime soon. I could only dig a few feet down before I hit rock, which explained the lack of trees or any plant life save for the carpet of stiff brush flowered with pale indigo petals, the only real color in this place. The shallow grave was more of a mound, but it was the best I could do for him. As for his preferences, he once told me that he liked the idea of having his ashes scattered in the Mediterranean. Jackson's eulogy was mostly me apologizing for my part in his death, knowing that it was a risk we took each and every time we went out to catch our haul. Had we known such a squall would bear down on us, would we still go? No. Into that fact I was innocent, yet I still felt the guilt the survivor often does. The rest of the day I spent resting and scraping dry wood into kindling so that I could make a fire in hopes that any passing boats or low-flying planes might see me out here. I had never been stranded like this before, but have read my fair share of stories about it, which led me to some self-delusion that all of this was kind of romantic. The solitude and primitive mechanics of basic survival brought to the forefront as some kind of biological imperative. I had to admit I was kind of enjoying it. I fell asleep with a belly full of peanut butter protein bar near a cheerful fire and dreamed of cheeseburgers. When I awoke, there were no cheeseburgers, but my disappointment evaporated with a sense there was something wrong. It took a minute or so to realize that the sun was in the wrong place. Either it rose in the south now, or that the island itself had somehow rotated. Both of these were so contradictory to my understanding of reality that I rationalized it to delirium brought about by dehydration. Yet in the back of my mind, a siren would not relent in its urgency. A steady message echoing through my skull, saying to get away from here. Scanning the horizon yielded no feature or hope that aid was forthcoming, so I hiked across to see if there was anything on this island that I could burn to make my fire bigger, more visible. Down to 2 liters of water, I had to be careful, and could probably fashion some kind of evaporator to purify the seawater. But I was not that desperate yet. The island was about a half-mile or so across, and maybe a mile long, bearing a single hill on the east side, yet my brain screamed that only yesterday it was the north side. The hill reached an elevation of about 25 feet, and I realized that it was not a hill at all. It was a ship, overgrown with the scrub that blanketed the interior of this place. I could see upon closer inspection that it was very old. My first thought was if I could get it to burn, it would make for a great signal fire, but it was practically crumbling and rotted, so it would not burn for very long, if at all. If I had to guess, it was a small frigate, 2 masts half buried and pointing like accusing fingers towards the ocean that wrecked her. Or maybe it was this island that imposed itself. While gathering, I attempted to pry a rectangular piece that seemed dry enough when it creaked open on rusty hinges, revealing the contents of a chest. Nothing of much use, really, just relics of a bygone age, an empty oil lamp, articles of brittle clothing and sundries, and an oilskin-wrapped journal written in some kind of Norse language that I later would learn was Icelandic. Flipping through the pages, I could see sketches of various things. A frequent image of a woman, maybe a wife they were trying not to forget the face of. The illustrations began turning into stranger compositions, sea monsters and the like. The writing progressed from a neat and skilled script to near illegible scrawls. The final entry was dated June 1790. I assumed it was June, and several times a phrase repeated Eyja, Beinannar. Though I could not translate it, I could, however, glean from the way it was penned that this person wrote these words with mounting apprehension. The trembling characters transferred the author's anxiety to me through the centuries that was then frothing in my guts. Piling the wood on a tattered wool blanket, I dragged the load back to my camp to rebuild the signal fire. Days passed in this fashion, gathering more wood, catching the various sea life trapped in the tide pools, wishing for some Old Bay seasoning. Watching the sunset, letting its colors blur into a wash of tangerine and crimson through unfocused eyes, viewing my past play out like a silent film. Cutting through the imaginary projection, I saw something appear. A thick, vertical silhouette bisecting the sun as it dipped beneath the curvature of the earth. Not knowing whether it was approaching or retreating, I scrambled to get more wood on the fire. After it was a roaring blaze, I sat and loaded a signal flare, waiting with my gaze unblinking to where the sun had just gone down. I must have sat there for hours in desperate hope that any second I would see the bright lights of rescue on its way, but none came. Perhaps it was my imagination, but I swear I heard a distant splash. I had 3 flares, yet resisted firing a single one that evening, in fear of wasting one on a hallucination or a strange trick of the light. Sleep did not come easy, as despair whispered certain death in my ear, while visions of monstrous creatures lurked just beyond the threshold of nightmares. Surviving can sometimes be a matter of doing nothing, conserving energy so that when it is needed, it is there, and like the evaporated seawater condensing and dropping one tear at a time into my canteen, I gathered myself to be ready. How many days passed I cannot say, but much of that time I spent trying to make sense from the ancient journal left behind by a crewman named Jon Einarsson. I looked for repetition of phrases or commonly used words to infer meaning, which lent to some rough translation to which I can say the ship was a whaling ship, and they were heading home without any success. That Jon Einarsson missed and loved his wife very much was evident by the many mentions in his entries, but dwindled further on. Eventually the text strayed to more pressing matters, such as the shipwreck and much darker things that desperate men do in such conditions just to keep living. Even then, as I slowly wasted away to skin and bone, the thought of eating my friend did not occur to me. At the mere thought of him, I glanced inland to where I had buried him, and I noticed something was off. As if the mound had collapsed, creating a recess in the pale soil. Knowing that this was normal as something decomposes, it loses mass in putrefaction. However, that voice in the back of my mind had become much louder and more insistent about these strange things in this strange place, so I could not leave it be. If only to appease my burning curiosity, I went to exhume my friend and found no trace of him, as if he were never there. Either that, or something had taken him. That was the moment when I felt the threads of sanity start pulling apart. I wanted to jump into the water and swim as far away from here as I possibly could. After standing for a while, gazing at that infinite expanse of ocean, an idea lighted on me, one that I had not seriously considered. And a raft was certainly a better strategy than just flinging myself into the open sea, so I got to work. I know now that if I had waited even one more day, I would not be writing this now. It was as good a raft as it could possibly be given the conditions and available materials. Most of it was made from the debris of SS Lenore, and it would keep me above the cold Atlantic, barring any more wild storms. One way or another, the old boat would take me home. With enough water to last a few days, I pushed off from the shore, taking only a few necessities with me, with one exception, Jon Einarsson's journal, which I had formed a deep connection to, and if I ever made it home again, would have it translated properly as soon as possible. The current was pulling west, but I paddled against it just to gain some distance from that place. As a growing unease was building, as if the thing I had just departed was aware of my absence and was watching me. The shovel I made to bury Jackson served just as well as an oar, maybe from adrenaline or just exhilaration of once again being afloat on the ocean. I paddled hard. Exhaustion caught up to me eventually, and when I turned to see how far I had gone, my heart sank. The island was still in sight, and not as far away as I would have hoped. Taking a few pulls of water and a handful of snail jerky that felt and tasted like salty rubber bullets, I pressed on. The sense of malice emanating from the island was a constant companion at my back. At that point, I was almost certain that the island was chasing me. Each slice into the sea was another pull on the rack, another lash from the whip, another bamboo shoot under my nails, yet panic kept me going even when the unnatural fog coalesced around me. I kept my rhythm steady, in painful hope to outrun it. The fog, so dense, I thought I could scoop a handful of it and drink from it. The human body can only be pushed so far until it simply shuts down, especially without fuel, and I was running on fumes. Over the sound of my own ragged breathing, I could hear the deep drone of the ocean, that murmuring thrum of water in constant motion. Beneath that and faintly, I could hear the waves breaking on those bone-white shores. Or was it engines? Did I see a pulse of electric light briefly flash through the shrouding mist? There it was again, a sweeping beam of light cutting a diffused tunnel through the miasma, and energy flooded me once again. My pursuer must have also sensed the nearby vessel, as a distinct vibration trembled through my haphazard craft, transmitting some primal outburst that its prey was escaping. My oar tore deep into the water, and once or twice I felt it scrape against something solid and grasping, yet always just out of reach. Perhaps the sheer amount of water this leviathan was pushing was lending speed to me, much to its own frustration, as that tremble turned into an audible roar that sounded from deep beneath the surface. My veins pumped acid from my machine gun heart, and every breath was salty fire. Yet I kept my pace steady and aimed relentlessly towards the light and the distant churn of diesel-burning motors. I reached for the flare gun and fired a round up into the night, its throbbing pulses so brilliant that for a few moments I could see the bulk of my pursuer behind me through the fog, and I gasped upon seeing a mere suggestion of its entirety. The island merely a crown upon the countenance of a shapeless titan. In the dying flare's red light reflected two vast unblinking eyes that were staring directly at me, and continued to stare as it slowly submerged until the light petered out. It was letting me go. Not trusting this odd sense of victory I had over this primordial being, I pressed on with what little strength left to me. Then, as I turned back to my heading, I was looking up at a deck full of astonished faces. None made any gesture, and I wondered if it was in shock of seeing a half-mad, starved man adrift on a ramshackle raft, or if they had seen what I did. Then they began cheering. I am not what you'd call a religious man, yet I waved and cried the tears of salvation as if I was witness to the second coming of the Lord. And it might as well have been, because I was saved. They welcomed me with blankets and bottled water, and many, many questions, but I think that was when I reached my threshold for consciousness and drift on an entirely different sea for many hours. I awoke a few times to see walls, order, and the safety of modern convention, each time thanking a God I did not truly believe in. I was going home. That was enough. One of the crew must have discovered the journal I had tucked into my ragged shirt, and had learned something that I could not decipher from its pages. He was all too friendly and skirted the issue with casual banter until he began to pry, and I was all too cooperative. Being in their absolute debt, I spared no details, not thinking about his angle. He asked me about the ship on the island, and I told him what I saw. Then a gleam lit his eyes with excitement. Then I understood his intent, to find the island, not to avoid it at all costs. My reaction was to warn him, but anything I said merely seemed to encourage that there was something there that I was trying to hide. He set the journal on my cot, where I lay, and departed without another word, coolly regarding me with a gloating smile. Perhaps he thought I was trying to hide a wonder, a treasure beyond a common man's hopes, with tales of sea monsters and certain peril. They wouldn't listen to my warning. To them, it may have seemed like ravings of a wretched castaway, which I couldn't fault them for. They left me at the port to the waiting emergency response crew, and as the doors closed to the ambulance, I made my peace with it all. but maybe it was the effects of the sedative flooding my veins. It was only a week until I saw the article. A commercial vessel with 27 aboard had gone missing. All efforts to locate them had been called off and were presumed dead. I tried to tell them. I really did. A few days after that, the ship was found, adrift and crewless, 200 miles from the distant shores of Greenland, a ghost ship. The realization that I wasn't a survivor or a victim of circumstance dawned on me then, that some inscrutable god or the universe wasn't testing my mettle, my will to live, or anything like that. It was that I served as the thrashing worm on a hook to attract bigger game. I was nothing more than bait. What was that creature, you ask? It's called a lingbakker, a whale-like leviathan that appears to wayward sailors as an island. Once they are on its shores, it will descend into the depths to drown them. I couldn't find a place in the story to really explain that, and that's okay. I find that exposition does something terrible to horror stories, so I avoid it whenever possible. I listen to many horror story podcasts, and what I find irksome is when the characters seem to know too much about the big bad that has imposed itself on them. Horror is so much like comedy, in the sense that if you have to explain the joke, it wasn't that funny. Until next time, listener, good night.